we as designers have a responsibility towards society. You give a soldier a gun, the soldier will fight. You don't give a soldier a gun, then also the soldier will fight. The end user will say, okay, put this gauge over here, put that gauge over here, and my problem is sorted out. Today, I will make someone's life difficult. They don't, they don't design it in that manner, right? More holistic design education would really help you. So every engineer without fail should be taking one course on human-centered design, regardless of whatever subject they are studying, whether they are studying chemical engineering, whether they are studying civil engineering. It really doesn't matter to me. In our case, in the case of India, I would very strongly say that all government services should have human-centered designs without fail.
Hello and welcome to the GAN project. Today we speak to Professor Vivek Kant. He's an associate professor of Department of Design at IIT Kanpur. We talk about human-centered design for complex systems and how designers need to intervene in government services, public infrastructure, and other socio-technical systems. I had lots of fun talking to Vivek, and there are some great takeaways for designers, engineers, and policymakers. Hope you enjoyed too. Let's begin. Welcome, Vivek, to the GAN project, and thanks for giving your time. It's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you, Kedar. Thank you for inviting me to the show.
Awesome. So I'll directly jump into the conversation that you have transitioned from electrical engineering to cognitive science to psychology and now design, right? Like, so if you could start by giving a little bit of your background and how this interdisciplinary journey shaped your thinking, shaped your thought process about complex systems.
So I started as an electrical engineer. I wanted to make things, and for me at that time, engineering was the way you would make things. So that was the thought process I had. So I joined engineering, electrical engineering. So the place where I studied, it was a very interesting setup. I was taught a course on systems engineering, applied systems engineering in my third year, and I was hooked. For the first time, I started to ask these questions about what is a system, how do you think about systems, stuff like that. So that led me to further explore into these areas. But at that time, these notions of complexity, design, um, how to think about systems more broadly wasn't clear to me. So this is about almost 20 years back. And over this course of 20 years, I started moving out of my narrow shell of engineering and really started to move and think much beyond engineering. So I was also very lucky that, so this is the time when when Indian IT industry is changing. So this is early 2000s, lot of changes, right? Lot of IT jobs, Indian IT sector is booming. So I got a job as systems engineer in one of the IT firms, and I worked in their R&D sector for some time in their R&D center, and I learned quite a bit. And that's where I really started to realize that, what I'm looking for is design. And the study area that you study is called UI, or user experience. At that time wasn't that famous. UI was still famous. So UI, you're looking at UI design. It all started when my immediate work supervisor told me that we have to do this project, and there was a lot of front end. So that's how I started, a front end programmer. In during that those projects, in those 2 years I was there with the IT firm, I learned quite a bit. And then I realized that I am more interested in understanding the thought process about how to go ahead and do design, not just the design itself, but also the thought process. So then I studied cognitive science for my first master's. Then I wanted to study a bit more. I did my second master's and I studied psychology. So post-cognitivist approaches. So first cognitive science, then post-cognitive cognitivist approaches. And then I brought all of this together in my PhD in systems design engineering. So there I really explored things related to complexity, design, human-centered design for complexity, because that's a very interesting area that we should be thinking about. So a lot of enterprise UX thinks about that. Think how to deal with the complexity of systems. So information systems design, those aspects are there. I studied for my PhD an area called cognitive human factors and cognitive systems engineering. So there we are looking at how do you support humans in very complex systems. So the complex systems could be defense, nuclear, oil and gas. So there are certain broad features that couple these systems. These are often these systems are called socio-technical systems. They involve a lot of technological elements and also rely a lot on humans to ensure that the system is functioning smoothly. So these systems you'll see all around the place. So, and a very famous example is your air traffic control, right? So there are air traffic controllers over there who are ensuring that the traffic management is working well, so that there are no crashes. And humans play a very, very important and crucial role in the system,
Mm.
and the functioning of the system to ensure overall optimization, overall functioning. As now, the key challenge for us designers over in these systems is how do you ensure that whatever technology that you have is human centric in nature. So that's where
Mm.
human centered design really plays a very, very important role. So think of things like if you're designing a screen for an air traffic controller, if you are designing the cockpit of an aircraft, if you are designing for cockpits of let's say ship, if you are designing very sophisticated products, high end products that require a lot of technological emphasis, but at the same time require also a heavy emphasis on the human. That is the
Right.
crucial juncture that I work on. So I work in three areas: human machine interaction, which is design of interfaces, information design, in the usage of design. Then I look at the area of human factors. So typically in India, you would know it as ergonomics, but I don't look at physical ergonomics. I look at the cognitive and organizational dimension behind it.
Mhm.
So cognitive human factors and organizational human factors. And the third area I look at is human systems integration. So how do you ensure what kind of processes you have in place, which will ensure that your human is successfully integrated with your entire technological process, right?
Mm.
So it's always a synergy between human and systems, human and technology. Word that we use in our literature is joint optimization of humans and machines. So it's not simply you are just focusing only on human centric aspects and you're forgetting about the machine. So what you are really developing is some way in which human is balanced with the technology without hampering the role of the human. So the whole idea is that the human is an overall systemic component and the system is the human's environment. So the key
Mm.
challenge is we do not have to reduce the human to a mechanistic component. So we have to recognize that the human is a living creature, a social creature, an ethical creature, person who is really thinking, the person who's really acting. You are thinking about these aspects. You also have to ensure that the human is properly set up in the process. So all of these areas are typically looked at by these subjects of human factors, human machine interaction, human systems integration. So they are subjects. So you can study these subjects. In India, we don't
Correct.
have these subjects, unfortunately. But if you go overseas, all these different countries, whether it's the US, UK, Japan, Australia, most of the Nordic countries, a lot of places in Europe, you will take 4 year undergrad courses in 3 year or 4 years, depending on where you go, courses in human factors, ergonomic, design for information design in these very complex kind of systems. So
Mm. Mm.
unfortunately, in India, we haven't moved into these heavily engineered systems. So designers actually have a lot of role to play. We are thinking is that see, we are getting and we have a lot of engineers, we get the technology right. Just getting it right is not enough. You have a good technology, but let's say you did not it right for the human, it is not usable for the human, then it becomes a challenge. People would want that they are performing at their level best, they are giving a lot of what do you call, a lot of inputs technologically, and they're getting the material right. But if it is not fitting in with the human, that's a big challenge. So from a design perspective, what it means is that we need more human centric designers to ensure that right at the very inception of the design of these very large complex systems, you are taking the human along. So humans are not an afterthought. So that's where human centered design plays a very important role in engineering systems or even socio technical systems. So that's how
Got it.
I started with engineering. To cut the long story short, I started with engineering, learned a lot about human sciences, and then came back and started really working into the design sector for these engineered systems.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's lots to unpack. So we'll keep it a little simple also. This is too much to process. So if you can like explain very simply what is or how do we define this human centric design also, right? But if I have to explain it to a layman, in India, still design has very different connotations. So if what is a human or how can we define human centric
Yes.
design?
So typically, what happens with design in India is that people would still think of it as color and paint. So it's something that you attach to the very end, and it looks good. Now see, I've done it. I've done a great job. Human centricity, on the other hand, is slightly different. So there are, when you design with a human centric viewpoint, so there are certain principles and practices of human centric design, and when you are designing. Keeping the human in mind, you're looking at the capabilities of the human, the limitations of the human. See, humans are good at certain things. So we are very good pattern recognizers, right? We think of patterns, we understand patterns very easily, and we act on it, right? Things which are difficult for machines to do. However, machines are very good at certain things. So, for example, navigating through these large information spaces, picking out certain things, doing a lot of laborious kind of jobs which would be tiring for humans, right? Now, we have to connect both the human and the machine together, right? That's where your human centric principles come in. Meaning, how do you, so there is some point that the machine is getting some input from the human and giving some output to the human, right? That is the place where you are really focusing on as human centric designers. You are defining how, what kind of inputs the human should be doing, what kind of things the human should be doing, what kind of information the human should be giving to the machine, how that is structured. Then what is the machine giving back to the human, how is that structured? So we are basically working in this interrelationship between the human and the machine, right? This relationship is our core area. We are neither completely with the humans. So with the humans is your human sciences, social sciences. With the machines are our engineers, right? And that's where the designer comes in, bridging the worlds between the human and the technology, right? That's where your human centric principles come in. You are thinking about the human, you're also thinking about the machine, and you are in some way or the other translating this whole process or transforming this whole process. So as designers, we are still developing this intermediacy, if you would like to call it, this process which is happening between the human and machine. We are designing the process, and in various ways.
Got
At
it.
one end, it
Got
can be simply what kind of information you will be showing. So that is one example. The other thing is you could also design the kind of messages that the person, that the machine may be giving, right? With the coming in of human and AI interactions, right? In what manner will the human be interacting with the AI? What output the AI will be giving? So how can we work in a synergy? So this is where human centricity really plays a role, which is slightly different from your traditional design disciplines also, right? So when you think of something like Richard Buchanan and others have talked about orders of design, right? So then first there is communication design, then there is product design, which design requires a lot of elements of communication design also. You cannot think about product design separately from if you don't have the communication aspect. So things like product form, product aesthetics, or product messages, what messaging the product is giving you, branding, those kinds of things, product design also has. Now you have a broader envelope of interaction design. So when you are doing interaction design, you also think about products, right? You also think about communication. Now we are looking at systems design, which looks at products, which looks at interaction, which looks at communication, all of it put together. So whenever we are thinking about human centered design and connecting it to systems, right, there we have a very potent mix of the design disciplines and connecting it with other disciplines. In all these cases, we are specifically asking the question, how can we design keeping the human in the middle? How can we design so that the whole notion of empathy and the cycle of empathy is retained?
I mean, these lines will be
Yes.
moving according to
Yes.
context and different
Yes.
disciplines and different areas of application. So is there a framework or is there couple of keywords which help us define that? How do we find the middle line?
That's a balancing act. So this is still a new area, and especially with newer technologies coming in, what typically happens is in our subject of human factors, we have certain areas that we look at. We look at things such as human function allocation. So human function allocation is an whole area that we study. In this, we ask the questions, what will go with the machine? What will go with the human? Meaning that you have to accomplish certain tasks and you have to accomplish it with a human machine synergy. So now certain things the machine will do and certain things the human will do. So how do we even define that? So that is what functions you give to the human, what functions you give to the machine. So these are typically building blocks for human centered design. Then we ask things which are more traditional, physical ergonomics related aspects also. Things like, if I have to grasp something, is the graspable object within my grasp, right? So these kinds of questions I ask. Can it be grasped by males with bigger hand span? Can it be grasped by females with smaller hand span, right? So your traditional design questions also occur in human-centered design. So human-centered design can be thought of as a more inclusive kind of a discipline which draws upon design disciplines, which draws upon technology and draws upon human-centric disciplines, human sciences, social sciences, so on and so forth. Yes. So based on that, we develop our own methods and tools, design processes, right? So how do we deal with complexity? That is one of the biggest challenges that we are facing. So a lot of work that was earlier done in design of control panels of nuclear power plants, that work was taken on forward by people, and then they started looking at different sectors. So air traffic control was another sector, then marine technology was another sector. So different sectors, people started to work on it and add to the literature and develop and add to the discipline of design itself. So typically designers have not entered, so to speak, full-fledged in this discipline, but we require more designers. Human factors is already well set. So cognitive systems engineering and cognitive human factors is a well-established discipline overseas. So those kinds of things we have to think about when we are really designing for the human.
So just zooming out, in my world, design systems has a very
Yes.
different definition of building stuff which is going to scale in say different devices or different peripherals, right? So in this context, how would you define design system and which all areas do we need it? I remember one example. I think Fukushima nuclear plant, they like, that's where I got to know even about the systems part of it, that you build concentric systems so that if one fails,
Yes.
it falls
Yes,
back,
the
and
design
there is
by
a
depth
fallback
philosophy.
mechanism.
Yes.
So I couldn't comprehend design system
Yes.
in whatever
Okay.
I have learned. So if you
Okay.
can help
So
there.
I'll make the distinction between design systems and systems design. So design, yes,
Wow.
design
Okay.
systems, and this was new to me also. I mean, after reading a lot, I came to know. So typically, for example, in communication design, people use design systems, or even in interaction design, people use design systems to develop their own structure and scaling up of the maybe the brand identity, the brand dimension of it across multiple devices, multiple arenas, multiple media. So the whole idea is in design systems is that you are thinking about uh, how the identity of the system is maintained throughout. The design system that you are building at, it can be a system of fonts, it can be a system of colors, and it can be a system of mediums different across various mediums. So how will this design system scale up? So that is typically used in communication design. Now there is systems design, which is a part of a design discipline, which is equivalent to or at par with something like communication design, interaction design, or even product design, right? So product design in itself are parts of design as a discipline. Uh, Design systems is one aspect of communication design or even interaction design as a discipline. So there's a difference in the areas that you all are looking at. Now, because you have both are looking at systems, that is why they have design systems and system design. Okay, so system design typically is the design of systems and also ensuring that you are designing for the humans within that system. So typically they are system design guys are looking at more in terms of scale, breadth, complexity. You are also thinking about more systems oriented concepts. So systems oriented concepts, I'll come to what systems oriented concepts would mean, but things like viability, flexibility. So what started to happen is, I'll go a little bit into the background of systems and systems design. Around early 1900s and then 1930s onwards, what started to happen is that a lot of new technology started coming into play. New technologies, new ways of thinking about things, new ways of functioning, and those aspects came in. So then what happened was people started to recognize that they need a common language for addressing these various disparate technologies or different aspects of things. Also during that time, people also started to recognize that you cannot simply reduce everything to parts or functioning of or search for ultimate causes, because in many cases, especially in the area of biology, what they started to recognize was it doesn't completely function like physics where you learn idea about one single cause and Newtonian causes and other things. People started to recognize that in biology there may be distributed causes, right? There's no one single cause, and oftentimes there is circularity in thinking, meaning A causes B, B causes A, and this continues, right? And there's various webs and chains to it. So scientists and technologists in general, and there were multiple thought processes that came through, but everyone started to recognize that you need some way to think about or talk about wholes, not just parts. Wholes which are not reducible to their parts. Phenomena which are not reducible to their parts. So, very famous example is that of when you listen to music. Okay, so when you're listening to music, you're listening to the melody of the music. You're not listening to the individual notes. So this was called a very famous Austrian philosopher by the name of Christian von Ehrenfels. Mentioned about this, and he used to call it the Ehrenfeld qualities. After him, it's named the Ehrenfeld qualities, or even the Gestalt qualities. The idea is that you are seeing things or grasping things in its totality. So now, this notion of systems, wholes, parts, that vocabulary has started being building 100 years back or even before that. 100 years back, what started to happen is people started coming into the recognition that, see, there's something different that is going on and we need to address this in some way or the other. Then by the 1950s and 60s, technologies, these large scale technologies started to come in. So after World War II, we see aviation booming a lot. We see nuclear booming a lot. And these are large scale changes coming in industry and society. So they had to send a person up to the moon. right? So then they started to recognize that we need engineers who grasp the functioning of the technology in its totality, but at the same time are not too much in depth into details of one particular thing. So then 1916 on 60s onwards, 50s, 60s onwards, you're seeing the growth of a new branch of engineering called systems engineering. And in systems engineering, what you're seeing is that there are these guys who work on these large scale projects, but do not go totally in depth, and they are engineers. Right, they have some role as managers also, technical managers also. They are really going in depth, not so much in depth into the functioning of individual parts or components or everything, but they look at the totality of the thing working. So growth of aviation, defense equipment, growth of this whole rockets, right? Wherever you have people involved in this one, in building of these large scale products. So systems engineering, systems thought is really booming, right? And during this time, human factors also starts. Now there are humans involved in these systems. How do you design for the human? So human factors engineering is also growing since 1960s onwards. And a specific aspect of human factors is this cognitive systems engineering or cognitive human factors, where information plays a huge role. So while you are driving your car, you have something over there. Now, earlier you had these round gauges. Now you have actual LCD screens. So how do you ensure that whatever you are designing is not actually hampering the driver from driving properly, right? So that the driver can maintain his or her situation awareness, right? Now, whether you're flying aircrafts or you're driving your car, right? And or you are doing some very difficult kinds of cognitive tasks. So all of this requires a very concerted emphasis on understanding of design, understanding of human limit capabilities and limitations, as well as understanding of technology. All three have to come together. When human centered designers work in these areas, systems designers basically work in these areas, then they are balancing all these three things together. And coming back to your earlier question of design systems versus systems design. So systems designers do this. Design systems, the graphic designers, the communication designers who build design systems, they are also adapting to this growth of these new technologies where they also have to scale up. So that's the difference between systems design and design systems. Both are important. Both are as
Correct.
necessary as each other. Okay, so we cannot get rid of them, or you say that is not important. Both are important.
It seems as if generalist versus specialist also can come up here. Like if the systems designer is like looking at a broader encompassing zone, then why has specialist grown up in the last
Say,
30, 40
so we
years?
need specialists also. Now, what has happened is that
No, I mean we'll need specialists, but the indexing of it or the demand for it
yes,
has been highly recognized as opposed to that.
oftentimes when you enter into the industry, that's where you really find these guys, systems engineers, really working, or the systems guys really working. Because in the industry, you don't get these disciplines that we have in academic settings. We have very neatly divided disciplines. This subject will do this subject will do this. In the industry, you work across disciplines. You have to deal with so many people. You have to understand this, right? So this is one of the key things that I learned when I was working in the industry. Problems in the real world don't come in neat little packages the way I was taught in my undergrad. We do need more. We do need more systems guys in the industry. We do need more systems guys academia also. At one point in time, there were a lot of systems engineers. There was a boom of systems and systems thought in the 70s and 80s in the US. So, and there were a lot of system science departments and other places now, but unfortunately, it slowly started to die down because of various reasons. Part of it was that it got diluted. Everything became systems. See, one of the things is that you also have to maintain your boundaries, saying this is okay, that's not okay, or this is what we exactly mean. Now systems became a buzzword also for many. So these, as well as other challenges, when you look at the history of systems and how systems grew and systems fell, that is in itself a big revelation. But currently, we need more of systems based approaches. I wouldn't say that we need all of it, but we still need a little bit of systems based approaches. People who look or understand various dimensions of a product, who can think across individual disciplines, or who have more integrative mindsets. So nowadays, designers are actually moving towards more integrative design disciplines. They recognize that products are good, interaction is good, but we really need things for integrating across the various design disciplines themselves, and how to even connect it with the functioning of the technology. So there, systems designers are needed. And systems design also, you will notice, is it means different things to different people. And I'll give you an example. When I did my undergrad in electrical engineering, I had one course on signals and systems, one course on control systems engineering, and during my PhD, I studied cognitive systems engineering, right? Especially looking at various cognitive systems and designing interfaces for these cognitive setups. Right. So when I tell my electrical engineering friends now I do systems design, and I tell them that I design actual interfaces, they look at me, because your cognitive schema is fixed in to think about. When you talk to engineers, they'll say what kinds of systems, or if you talk to electrical engineers, they'll say what aspects of systems are you looking at. Is it some kind of communication design or communication channel design or something like that? So that is another big challenge that I face in trying to explain people why different from what they do, but still what we are doing is actually a human centered discipline.
I think we'll move to a little bit of practical aspects. So, if you can explain how can
Yeah.
this be practiced in India specifically, right? I mean, which sectors are less likely or less risky to try out, and which sectors
Okay.
perhaps we should
So,
invest more?
few of the sectors, so for example, which involves a lot of complexity, something like defense sector would be very, very important. They require a lot of systems and human centered design for systems. Social innovation projects, they require a lot of systems thinking, lot of participation, participatory design. So that co-design dimension, those angle or fit in with the increase in complexity. So these are like two separate ends. Any kind of socio-technical system sector, air traffic control, clear, oil and gas, typically these are driven by engineers, but we also need designers over there. So control design of control panels. But defense is a very good example, because part of the reason is India has one of the largest standing armies, and we need to design good equipment, good interfaces for the soldier on the battlefield, right? Whether these guys are in the sea or out up in the air or on land, whatever information that we have, or how do we structure information, whether it is through variables, or whether it is structuring of information, or display of information. For example, you are in a war room setup, or whether you are in a war gaming setup, right? How can we help people to really act on information, and how can we structure information? So that is one information design aspect, where which requires systems thinking and can be contextualized specifically in a particular sector of defense. So a lot of defense requires human-centered design, human-centered thinking, and systems engineering. A lot of defense would require that, definitely.
Yeah, I remember I was called for a talk in Ahmedabad Design Week where the topic or the theme of the conference was design for defense, and the army chief was there, and he said, "We have a lot to do, right? When people are in high altitude places." You can't really take water up there. So, can you design pumps? Can you
Absolutely.
design logistical setup where lots of stuff can be taken up reaching there safely, right? So how would curriculum look like, right? I mean, if we have to suppose to like design an ideal curriculum for human factors, considering human factors across
So
institutes?
yeah, in fact we did an exercise regarding that. A very good friend of mine, Ram Maikala, he's heading the musculoskeletal disorders lab at the National Safety Council in the US. So along with him, we embarked on an exercise that what kind of human centric aspects, or more broadly, what kind of human factors curriculum would be good for a growing country like ours. So one is a typical, so we would want to look at people, we would also want to look at people in particular contexts, right? Both are there. So when we look at people, we look at the traditional physical, physiological dimensions of based on the way body works physiologically. Those aspects we have to look at. We also have to look at cognitive limitations, how quickly you respond, how quickly you understand, grasp, perception, cognition. That dimension should also be there. You would also want to look at certain design disciplines which specifically cater to people. So a lot of human centric design dimension should also be there. And finally, context based aspects. So for example, a specific application area of social innovation in remote areas of the country, or would be very different from a very highly technological sector such as nuclear, right? So different application areas have their own demands, they have their own rules, they have their own set of practices associated. So this would be a broad way of thinking about what a curriculum design would mean for a growing country like ours. Now there are few things we really need. We need serious study about accidents that are going on in India, right? People study accidents to understand how accidents happen in complex systems. So one of the things which I did not tell you was that I did a postdoc in socio-technical systems and socio-technical resilience, where I was specifically looking at accidents, how accidents occur in complex systems. Okay. So up till my PhD, what I had done was I had studied systems and the human contribution to those systems. And now I studied how systems fail and the human contribution to it. So how systems work and how systems fail, right? Both are very important. I'm telling you, so many people are dying in the country, and that is because we are not either designing our technologies properly, or we are not designing our rules properly, or we are not designing in a manner that is taking into account the human dimension of it, right? This is a big challenge.
Hmm.
And somewhere, somehow, we have to wake up and recognize that there are disciplines that study this. We are not the first guys to study it. We are actually facing the brunt of it, right? We should, for one very classic example, is civic planning. We have to think about urban planning in a manner such that we cannot bring in a lot of cars in so narrow streets. If we have a lot of cars, it will improve our consumption, it will improve the individual comfort, but what it is happening is, at a systemic level, it is bringing all of us down, right? Because our streets are not wide enough to handle that volume. It's simply, the basic idea is that, if you have a narrow channel, you can only send so much of the water through, so we can only send so much. So how can we seriously think about, see, it is not simply a technology problem that I increase the size of the road. It is also, how can I regulate when do I send what kinds of vehicles, or how can I regulate the number of vehicles on the road. Also things like, how can I plan for having less denser cities, right? Or even how can I plan in a manner that will be conducive to people who are coming in the future. Because see, these planning and systems kinds of disciplines, they always occur not just here and now, but over multiple time scales. So you have to recognize that there is a whole saying in systems that today's solutions are tomorrow's problems. Okay, what we think now is a good solution will sooner or later become a problem later. Part of the reason is that the context will continue changing. So in earlier times, when Indians, at least my dad's times, Indians did not have that much consuming power. So the cars that were there, Ambassador or Fiat, later Maruti, right? They were also less in number. And now the aspirations of people have changed and the consumption patterns have changed, right? People are buying more cars. That is bringing about a very vicious kind of a cycle. So it is not about this is good or bad. It's simply about how do we plan for the future very seriously, and how do we start bringing in these systemic dimensions to your planning and decision making. This is already there in when you study systems planning or urban planning, or even policy making. That has to be connected. That has to be connected to the other disciplines also. It's not that these guys do the planning and we somehow follow it. Things are changing very fast in India, and we really want to, if we have to really think about the future, so that accidents do not continue to happen. See, certain places you'll not believe. So I did a study of accidents. So what I did was I took Times of India newspaper and I looked at accidents from page number 2 to page number 10. Okay, so these are pages which you typically would not look at in the newspaper that much, not the front page, right? So these are pages where you would see these very small paragraphs, okay, where man is walking on the road, falls into a manhole and dies, right? The person is walking on the street, a wall collapses, the person dies. In the slums, people get electrocuted during rains, and this continues. Fire hazards, cylinders bursting in dense places kills people. Okay, now we can treat it as symptomatic problem, saying that okay, this is one case, we will improve the safety, we will sort out things, we will educate people, that will work out over a period of 5 years. I'm telling you, page number 2 to page number 10, and there are these things which are happening, which are reoccurring. And we looked at the Mumbai section. What I basically wanted to point out, that there is something very serious going on in the background and we are not recognizing it. The worst case is that it can happen to you, it can happen to me, right? It's an existential threat you're not recognizing. You think that, you will do this, you will do that. You are crossing the road, someone hits you and runs off, and then you are on the street. It is very, very dangerous the way we are living. We are surviving. We are not living, we are surviving with all of these things. Look at the number of train accidents. Again and again, you're seeing this pattern. Again and again, you're seeing this pattern. It's not about blaming someone. So, this is one thing I want to get rid of, that I'm not trying to blame anyone. I'm not trying to blame the person. See, what happens is people don't get up in the morning and they go ahead and say that today I will kill such and such people. Okay, it's not, these are not what do you call murderers and psychopaths. These are people who are working in a system and they want to deliver the best possible. Now, our challenge as designers, as systems designers or human factors designers, is how do you design equipment so that even in certain cases where people will commit mistakes, your system should be such that these are locally handled. So the example that you had given was the defense in depth philosophy, was exactly that, that you have these layers of defense built into your system, right? Even if one fails, right, it is locally captured, which means a lot of it doesn't turn into a catastrophe. So in human factors, there's a very nice metaphor given by a very famous psychologist, James Reason. So he says that in a system, these layers are like slices of cheese, and he gives the example of Swiss cheese. So Swiss cheese has these large holes in it. So he says that in your system, there are these slices of cheese, and only those accidents escape through where all the holes line up. So there is a hazard, and then there is a layer over here, then there's another layer, then there's another layer. In case this layer of cheese doesn't have this hole, it will not transfer off to the next layer, right? So this hazard does not become that. This is a big
Beautiful.
challenge. I mean, designed for There is no one single answer, but we really need to understand that the kind of things we are bringing in, this is very serious. Okay, people will die if we continue to keep on packing things in a very dense environment. So we are thinking not only in terms of individual, we are thinking in terms of families, communities, organizations, institutions, regulations, and governance. So when you are thinking about socio-technical systems, it's not just designing for the human. It is really designing or recognizing that there are these various levels to your socio-technical system. So that's where the real challenge comes. That you have to have an understanding of social sciences just by saying that, I think and I know what the other person thinks, we can do good design. It will not work like this. It's the same thing that they teach you in design school, that if you are to do usability test, doesn't mean that your friends' kids are good enough as users to do your usability tests. So that's the big challenge.
Yeah, that's very fascinating because I remember I interviewed Dhaval Ashar, who's and we spoke about road safety and general safety around transport. And he I remember, if I'm remembering correctly, he mentioned that a lot of places these long term thinking is not there. So what happens is, okay, traffic ho gaya, then they will like convert into or add a signal.
Yes, yes.
After that signal
Mm.
breaks or whatever, that capacity is gone out, then they create into a one way. And then one way nahi to fir then they'll build a bridge or a underpass, and then they'll build a bridge on top of it. So this keeps continuing instead of some first principle thinking that can we build it, or can we take a step back and think of decentralizing the two cities itself or two locations itself, so there is
Yeah.
whatever those 15-minute cities concept can thrive. Then what you're pointing to seems like a designer
Yeah.
is no longer a designer here.
Mm.
He's or she's a
Yeah.
anthropologist, an expert in many areas, right? So then how would a designer think of it, or begin, or
We do need designers, because one of the things which anthropology or sociology as a science does is that it remains a science. Science is about understanding things, not into intervening into things. So they have their own set of problems. That's why some people move towards more scientists. Also, they move towards more activity oriented aspects or activist mentality they adopt. The sociologists also do that. So they have their own ways of thinking about it. But designers, few things designers are good at, or even when you learn about things in design schools, they are very good. So things like elements of design. So they typically start you off in various kind of media, the exploring different media. And in the future, design schools would have to really, when they are intervening in these large systems, they need to study a lot of these different systems, and then they'll have to find their niche in these areas also. So just by saying that I am a designer, I do this, and this is how I will go ahead and interact with them, will not be enough. So some of the things we have to borrow from them, some of the things we have to make our own, but also recognize that it will not be enough. In the long run, you'll constantly be learning. The flip side is that engineers also and social scientists also would end up learning from design and design oriented techniques. So, for example, one of the in the past decade, one of the big exports of design has been design thinking, right? Whether you agree with it or you don't agree with it, it is still there, and people have started to recognize that, there's something added to it that wasn't there in our previous mode of thinking, right? How long design thinking remains, we don't know. But especially in these systems and systems oriented projects, few things we would really want, at least I would want my students to have, is at least be as rigorous in your methods as social scientists would do. Whether you are doing anthropology or sociology, they are very rigorous even with qualitative methods. So when I was in my PhD, I on my PhD committee, I had a sociologist on my PhD committee. The guy told me that if I'm not attending his courses in sociology, he will not sit on my committee. I ended up taking courses in sociology. It is not there on my transcript, but I learned quite a lot, right? How to even conduct social research in itself, qualitative research, is not an easy process, right? You have to ensure these people are there. You really have to sit, you really have to empathize with them, really think what they are thinking, how they are thinking, right? Sitting and transcribing the notes, looking at those various chunks and seeing this is making sense, this pattern is not making sense, right? Qualitative research in itself is a big challenge. So in design we have watered it down, right? I would want that in the future, if we are doing proper systems design and dealing with humans in these complex systems, all designers should be trained properly on methods, right? Then they should be trained properly in these kinds of things that you do in terms of aspects of storytelling, right? That you learn in your design school, right? So one very nice example that I have seen and I like quite a lot is that of exercises that they give you, right? In your first year of design school, they'll give you an exercise. This is a white sheet with a black dot on it. Go over with 10 steps or 10 kinds of illustrations where in the end this will be reversed. So there will be a white circle and a black screen. So how will you tell a story with this, right? What this does for you. Okay, this another example is something like you are given this object and you have to look at it from various perspectives and then try to say something about it or cut it off into sections. This really emphasizes the visualization dimension. These are core design disciplines, right? This no other discipline will teach you. So this has to be there, right? So we have to evolve a discipline
Mm.
that takes into account the best of design, the way design is practiced, and the best of these various disciplines and merge it in a manner this is conducive to a designer. This is very important. That you just simply get a sociologist over there and he'll come and teach you all the courses. It will not work. It's just not work. You have to spend a lot of effort
Mm.
into really trying to understand how the sociologist is developing something and then practice it. Now you'll say, I don't have enough time on a design project. Now I have to create an industry ready person in these 4 years, but I cannot teach them everything about every discipline. So we have these very short kind of focuses. Then you have this whole, unless that integration happens, I don't think we'll be able to pull it. So this will, this is something that the design community really has to think about very seriously. That we need designers. We need designers who go beyond your traditional communication product interaction, industrial and interaction, and move towards the large scale systemic integrative thinking. So many people, many design schools have started developing this integrative design or even systemic design or systems oriented design or transdisciplinary design. So these are on the horizon. But if we want to seriously bring it in a manner which is helpful for Indians and future Indians whom we will serve, we really have to think about how we are growing as a discipline, as a country. Both has to be brought in together. This is very serious because we as designers have a responsibility towards society. We cannot forget that. Okay, it's different for different people.
Mm.
We are more closer to doctors, okay, because we deal directly with people. And there is this whole notion of in medical you have the whole notion of you don't have to cause harm. That should be implemented for all designers. This is very important. It's not about that you create something, you know that what you are creating will cause problems sooner or later. And the part of the challenge is in earlier times what used to happen is communities over a period of time would evolve what is important for them or what would be the best form or best thing. We don't have this luxury anymore. So here we have a new guy, okay, or new girl who will go ahead and tell you a solution, and the solution should work, right? I mean, this is a big challenge for a designer. It's not an easy thing. So we have to train our designers in that manner. I mean, this is a big
Mm.
challenge for the entire design community. It's not
Yeah, yeah.
about what I think or something, but others also have to really like add this, bring this into their collective psyche for the design community. They say so whenever they tell us that that what if the client will say that this is too costly, right? In bringing these human factor interventions, so they'll tell you
Mm.
that okay, then you tell the client that if you think this is costly enough, think of how expensive an accident will be for you. So it's the same kind of thinking. If you don't do it,
Mm.
I
Mm.
mean, you'll pay
Correct.
sooner or later. You'll pay. You'll never get away with that.
No, whatever you're saying is so gratifying also, because part of my this project is to connect these interdisciplinary thoughts, right? Because a pure education is, what do you think of incentives, right? Like, why are then these incentives not aligned? Because if the incentives are aligned, the system can be.
And my good may not be the same way that I'm thinking about. See, I may be thinking about good for myself. I may be thinking about good for my family. If I have good clothes on, my stomach is full, I am satisfied in life. It really doesn't matter whether the other person is suffering, but I'm still thinking about good. So this is a big
Mm.
challenge. I mean, see, what is happening is that there is no right or wrong to it, but it's just that this is one, again, to quote this oft used term by Rittel and Weber, this is a wicked problem. Okay, there is no one right answer. My end goal is always shifting. If I've reached this goal, then I've realized that my goal has already shifted, right? And the people involved in the process, many people are committed, many people are not committed. Many people just, it's also the social dimension is involved. This is a constantly ongoing process that we have to be involved in. But we do want that the guys who come and study design, the people are future designers, should have some or the other basic awareness that this is going on, this is happening. That thought process we have to bring it in. It's not about whether we will convert everyone to our way of thinking only, but at least these guys who will go tomorrow, they will go and sit on various what do you call, design teams, head design teams, sit on the boards of various companies, right? If we plant the seed into them, over a period of time they will also think. It's, people are not stupid, they are extremely smart, right? These designers who come and work with us, extremely smart, they have their own thought process, they're very, very creative people. So when they are creative people, over a period of time, we have to bring in this social awareness into them. That aspect, I think design has done a good job
Mm.
at it. Many design schools send you out for working with the underprivileged, or even understanding that this is a serious problem. And somehow designers have to address this, or at least come into the conversation to mention that these issues exist. They'll never go away. Okay, there will be rich, there will be poor, there will be haves and have nots. All of this will remain. Still, it's as an ongoing process. We have to recognize that the future will be very different from what we are dealing right now, and which was different from my dad's time and my grandfather's time. So how do we make our designers future ready? I
Correct.
think if
Yeah,
we are
yeah.
able to bring that dimension into our design education, I think that is very important.
So I think, talking about the future, we'll move to the last section of this conversation. And I remember we were chatting before the call also that, kind of AI is demanding designers to become more engineers, at least in my domain, where UI is kind of can be
Mm-hmm.
directly made into a prototype by just vibe coding or whatever, right? While your approach says the other way around, which is engineers have to become
So
designers, right?
there
So
is
can you elaborate on that? What does it mean?
The way technology is progressing, there's no one single answer. So I have to think about it. The way technology is progressing, it is definitely putting demands on the designer. There's no doubt about it, especially the kind of design and this and that is being generated very quickly on the fly. I think that is really pushing the designer out of their comfort zone, or the things that they have learned in their school while or being trained, right? So now they are faced with new challenges. This is where I would think that a more holistic design education would really help you. So an example is that in a design school, they will give you an exam, they'll give you that exercise where you have to take these boxes of color and you'll have to just to understand color theory, right? Just for that one, for understanding, to gaining that understanding, you're spending one whole semester doing those exercises, right? It really is giving you a sense which AI is not able to comprehend per se, right? Or even if it does in the future, for example, this present Ghibli exports that the AI is doing, right? It's doing a great job at it. But as a designer, even to understand that there are certain processes and certain aspects to your development of color or thinking about color is in itself a meta learning that will help you to then learn further new things with the AI. So I would think that yes, our job roles would definitely differ, but I would also think that your design curriculum and your design education is such that it will force people to reinvent themselves in a constant manner. So I think that design still has a role despite of the coming in of the AI, right? So that will happen. And that's where the whole, I was earlier mentioning about this creative dimension that designers emphasize, that will play a huge role. I'm not saying that maybe in the future, machines are getting more creative. That is also perfectly okay, right? Then it's a collective existential problem, not just the design problem. It's a problem for engineers as well as designers. Now, coming back to what I have been emphasizing is that more engineers. So, I don't want engineers to become human centered designers, because there's a lot of engineering design in itself which is very important. So for example, in your third year of engineering, you study product design, okay, where you go through a very structured engineering process or even a more creative process in some cases, right? So engineers should learn design. They should learn, in fact, a lot of engineering design, and they should learn a little bit of human centered design. So, in that way, what will happen is that once they move on further with their education and their work in their real life, they don't end up becoming one of those engineers who say that what's the big deal in this whole thing, color, it becomes color and paint. Because let me tell you very clearly, when I was in my undergrad, I had not known that you could study design as a subject. I was so stupid. Okay, this was 20 years back, and today, here, after all these years, um, because when you are into that engineering realm, when you are dealing with these very inanimate kind of objects and things or like that, it's very much your knowledge of physics, your knowledge of this one, and your knowledge of engineering processes is coming together. But now, in the real world, let's say you are an engineering manager, okay? You are dealing with a product where you have to deliver, and that product contains some kind of a human in the loop, right? Now you are dealing not with just with engineering design, but you are dealing with product design, and product design in a much broader sense than an engineering school or design school will teach you. You basically have to deal with designers, you have to deal with researchers, right? Your user researchers. Now, if you haven't been taught or you don't have awareness that these things are important, you'll end up being a bull in a china shop. So you have to tread very carefully. So that is why all engineers in the country, without hesitation, should take one course on human centered design or some course related to introduction to design, about what design is, why it will help you. What this will do for the country and future engineers is that it will give you a wide awareness, okay, a perspective. This is very important in the future. One of the things which I
Perspective.
do all the time is in my classes that I teach, especially with the guys who come in from an engineering background, is, see, I take out my cell phone and I ask, how many of you all have a cell phone? Everyone will raise their hands, right? And then I tell them to continue keeping their hand raised, right? And then what happens is, then I tell them only those people should keep their hand raised whose phones are designed in India. And you will be amazed. There is not one person in the class whose hand remains raised. And then I ask them, why is it that we are not designing things? Even though you all are all world class engineers, you will go set up your own industries somewhere. You will sit in these very corporate kind of setups. You'll do your management degrees from these Ivy League schools in the US, right? And you will run companies. You have to understand that their design is a very uniquely human dimension, right? You need to incorporate it. So every engineer without fail should be taking one course on human centered design, regardless of whatever subject they are studying, whether they are studying chemical engineering, whether they are studying civil engineering. It really doesn't matter to me. But they should be aware that this is general literacy. If we bring general literacy about design and design awareness to engineers, hopefully, not this generation, but the next generation should be better, or at least they'll be more accommodating. They'll be more open to ideas about design. So that is at least one of the things I would really strongly think about.
Awesome. This is so good to hear. Yeah. Okay. Um, so zooming out further, which are like few critical areas where this design intervention is required and is often overlooked? And obviously, because it will take some time for academia to improve their courses and to revise at a primary education level and secondary and then so on and so forth, how can a layman participate, or how can existing designers or engineers?
Human centered design, human factors, and human systems integration. All the three can be used in various sectors, especially certain sectors which will help you out is or maybe things such as places where constant human interaction is required. In our case, in the case of India, I would very strongly say that all government services should have human centered designers without fail. Okay, very very important. This will improve our delivery of services. This will aim towards what the government wants in terms of good governance, right? If you have good services, and it can range from anything, paying your gas bill, paying your electricity bill, getting your driver's license, each and every government service should be human centric in nature without fail. That is an urgent point of intervention for our country. If we don't bring this in the next 4 or 5 years, we will continue to suffer. It's like needless suffering. And it's not about that those guys are good or bad. See, what typically happens is the way humans are, we have evolved, right? We would think that that person has done it, or someone is to blame. So we blame the person, problem gets sorted out. Over that time, that person gets fired, or this, that, whatever happens, right? But what you are not recognizing is that there is a deeper systemic level undercurrent that is going on. That is what designers really have to target. All designers, okay, without fail, should be emphasizing on good information design in the government. All your government forms should be properly designed, okay? All your websites should be properly designed. It should be made accessible to all people in the country. See, what has happened in the past 10 years is we have leapfrogged into a very interesting era. We never, as a country, we were heavily into computerization and automation. As a country, we leapfrogged
Maybe,
into this
yeah.
era on
Yeah.
mobile phones. So now people have access to mobiles, cheap computing devices. We never planned for it, but now we are a country of mobile phone users. So we have to ensure that the information that is there across all physical media, digital media, whatever it there should be there, government should incorporate everything, which means all of our forms should be better designed, right? Financial sector should be better designed. The hidden costs and everything should be brought out forth through proper design. It's not about legal and small text and the fine print, right? Good information design. When was the last time you opened a bank
Right.
account? You see the number of boxes and other things that you have to fill, and every time you look at it,
Yeah,
it
don't
looks
ask
like
me.
a big blob. Okay, it looks like a blob that you have to like literally navigate your way into.
Yeah.
Right? We need good information design. Need good services, and this has to be brought in. And this has to be brought in the civil sector. It is very, very important. This is an urgent area of intervention.
Correct, correct. Yeah, so
Yeah,
now I'm in Singapore, and if
exactly.
I go to the income tax website, it's such a breeze to work. Like, it is just one click, and like you log in. In fact, forget Singapore; it's obviously way too evolved. But certain
Yes.
websites, I was applying for a visa in Japan, and the way the form is to fill up a visa form,
Yeah.
it's fully accessible.
All these government offices, I mean, they are thinking about things in a different level. My question is, as a country, why are we not thinking about it? It's not that Indians or middle class Indians don't deserve it, or somehow if you are Indian, you are in that starvation era, that we are a poor country, so we shouldn't have good services. What is stopping you from having good services, properly designed services? It's not that you are not printing forms. You are printing forms, right? If you had a designer right in place who would have done a good information design problem job on it, what would have happened? Would it have? And it's not. See, one of the biggest challenges that is there for designers of the next era is exactly this: design for public good, design for citizen services. If you don't do this, right, people suffer. Okay, people, it's not life threatening, but it's like sitting over there and mentally you have to. And we are in that era of mobile phones. Okay, our attention span has gone down. Blame the reels. Okay, whatever you want to do, context is changing, right? We are trying to hit a moving target.
Cool. I think we have covered a lot of stuff. I just wanted to end the conversation with one very, very interesting stuff that you have been dealing with. And it's more of nothing related to the main conversation, but just a concluding note that I went through a report on integrating human centered design in the Indian defense sector, right? Which we briefly spoke about. So, if you were to imagine the Indian defense ecosystem, if I may call it, say like
Yeah,
from 20 years from now, fully integrated with HCD, uh, what would the picture look like, right? Like, how would different soldiers, uh,
yeah.
army people, and everyone, engineers, policymakers, how would.
Okay, that is one of the most difficult areas where you can integrate design, because defense is such an area. I'll tell you that you give a soldier a gun, the soldier will fight. You don't give a soldier a gun, then also the soldier will fight. So you understand that your technology, your what do you call, your good experience of using or ease of use of using that technology becomes secondary to this whole mindset where you are there on this in this accomplishing a certain intention, right? Now your commanding officer will tell you, you jump regardless of, without thinking twice, you will jump however high the building is, you will not think about it. That's how the military is trained. The person will tell you, use whatever equipment is there, you will use the equipment. Now, given that challenge, what have I found after coming to India? So 2018 onwards, I've been working and very, how to say, very closely or running after these defense guys, okay, to incorporate human-centered design in the defense. And earlier I had started talking about human factors, right? Which is already well set in various defense sectors overseas. The US, UK, they have very nicely well integrated programs where you incorporate human centered design and human factors. Right? In India, we don't have that. And whatever we have is a very limited way of thinking about it. So whatever Indian defense is doing is good, but we need more of it. We need more human centricity into your design of equipment, especially complex equipment, complex systems, right? You're designing the cockpit of an aircraft, right? So what typically happens is because of the lack of designers in this sector, what you're seeing is that they are engaging the end users, but the end users become the designer, so to speak. The end user will say, okay, put this gauge over here, put that gauge over here, and my problem is sorted out, right? But if you tell, or when a designer comes in, right, and a designer asks this question, so the defense projects that I typically work on, our job is to understand the requirements of the end users, translate it in a manner that is conducive, and then we go along the entire design cycle. This kind of a design cycle, so to speak, wasn't there when avionics engineers were developing something, let's say, because they are not trained to think in those terms, right? So in fact, there is a huge gap or a need for more designers, more human factors engineers in defense in the country currently. So, what happened was, after running around with these defense guys, not just the end user, but also the technology experts, the guys who do the technology, I got tired and I wrote this policy report, which was very thankfully published by CII in their National Design Innovation committee. It was supported by the committee. So in 2023, we unveiled this report. This report is available online on the CII website. And this report, what is saying is that it is not just inclusion of design at the level of designers, but it is also inclusion of design at the level of your organization, at the level of governance. So basically, what it means is, what in UX terms you would say, this is UX integration across your organization. UX maturity, you would call it. This has another name in human factors. This is called human systems integration. You are incorporating human centric design into your entire systems life cycle. So 20 years from now, if we guys include more designers, more human factors engineers in the defense sector, 20 years from now, we will be reaping benefits. The reason is, most defense equipment, they are like capital intensive equipment, right? You spend money now, that thing will remain with you for the next 10, 15 years of your life. And many people are actually trained in those kinds of equipment. So what typically happens is that if your design is faulty, you are still trained to work according to that faulty design, right? Faulty design in the sense that design which is not conducive to human use, but still you have to press A, B, and C. You are thinking about pressing A, B, and C, and the designer has said A and B over here, C and D over here. So now you're doing this, right? This is a simple example, right? But the engineers being engineers, and we cannot blame engineers also. That's the best part. It's not that they have poor intention, that today I will make someone's life difficult. They don't they don't design it in that manner, right? But the challenge is that if we are successfully able to incorporate it, right, what will happen is that a lot of these guys who are ready to give up their lives for the country, their day-to-day lives will be, they will die not not million times in the course of using the equipment, but die
Will
once
be made simple.
gracefully and heroically. Okay, so why make their everyday life difficult? This is what we are really after.
That's very, very inspirational, sir. I think all power to you. And there's a lot to unpack in this episode, like lot of inspiration for people who are not in the design sector as well. So thanks. I think we can conclude on this note. Thanks a lot for giving your time. It was just amazing to know a very different side of design.
You're doing phenomenal work. So thank you for having me here with these multiple wonderful people. I barely measure up to them, but thank you.
Thanks for watching till the end. What an illuminating conversation with Vivek Kant. His insights on human centered design and systems thinking remind us how crucial it is to create technologies that work with human capabilities. His passion for making complex systems more accessible and safer through thoughtful design is truly inspiring. If you enjoyed this episode, please like, share, and comment below. This show has been a labor of love, so sharing and subscribing to the channel is highly appreciated and helps us reach more people with these valuable conversations. All links, including Vivek's work, are in the show notes. Recommend a guest for a future episode, join our WhatsApp channel for latest updates, follow TGP on Instagram, and don't forget to join our mailing list for the episode updates. And thank you for being part of the GAN project community. See you in the next episode.